Hey, history buffs, welcome back to History with Tim. Today we are diving into one of the most dramatic and final pivotal moments in Irish history, the end of the Easter Rising of 1916. In this video, I'll be reacting to Extra History's fantastic series that captures the intensity, the courage, and the heartbreaking consequences of the rebellion. We'll explore the rise of the Irish nationalists who dared to challenge one of the world's most powerful empires and the tragic fall that followed. This event was not just a rebellion, it was the spark that ignited the fight for Irish independence. We're going to see how the British's hard-handedness will come back to bite them. So grab a cup of tea, settle in, and join me as we witness the rise and fall of the Easter Rising of 1916. And hey, if you enjoy these deep dives, just real quick, don't forget to support our channel through our Patreon. By doing so, you help us keep the legacy of these historic moments alive and support our efforts to preserve our national parks and historic sites. Let's get started. All right, so we're going to do this the way we always do this. We're going to play the video. I'll jump in, talk about it, and so on. So here we go.
North King Street, Dublin, Ireland, April 26, 1916. Crouched behind captured barricades, a British officer issues the order every soldier dreads. Fix bayonets! His platoon complies, sliding the long blades onto their Lee Enfield rifles. A momentary pause as the soldiers wait, collecting their courage. Charge! Shouting, the British surge over the barricades and up the street. Rifle fire booms from the tall, tightly packed buildings surrounding them and blasts out from a barricaded pub. The officer leading the charge takes a bullet. His men drop, killed or wounded.
So what this is discussing is the attack of the Sherwood Foresters. This was a regiment of, obviously they were from Nottingham in England, but they were charging down a street, and they believe it was only like 2 or 3 men, or men or women. It's not actually very clear on who the rebels were. It was just there was very few rebels, and it stopped the entire regiment. So it's pretty impressive that they were able, because what they also did was they burrowed through all the houses, so they were literally jumping building to building.
The attack lasts mere seconds, as without cover, the soldiers are easy targets for the Irish nationalists sheltering behind the street barricades. The survivors withdraw. Wasting no time, a few nationalists, desperate to replenish their supplies, leap from cover to grab weapons and ammunition from the slain. And they'll need every round, for blood is now trickling into the gutters of North King Street. And as more men give their lives for the conflict, and more civilians find themselves caught in the crossfire, that trickle soon swells to a torrent. This episode is brought to you by, well, you, our lovely patrons over at Patreon. To hear about how you can vote on history topics we make shows about, and some pretty...
Just saying, his patrons love him.
neat new stuff in the EC merch store, please stay tuned until after the episode. 2 days after the start of the Easter Rising, British efforts were focused on isolating and crushing small Irish nationalist enclaves that had dug in throughout Dublin city centre. The Four Courts and neighbouring North King Street, where the British launched their doomed bayonet charge, was one such rebel stronghold. The area was a tangle of slum housing and narrow streets and alleys, a nightmare for any attacker. So the British mostly tried to tunnel through walls, going from one building into the next, rather than risk the open street. Nationalists fired from windows and rooftops, or from behind their barricades, some moving from house to house to ensure they kept the element of surprise. And the British claimed that when cornered, the rebels would throw away their weapons and pretend to be civilians, even going so far as to use women as shields. Now, this may have been true, or it may have simply been a justification to excuse what happened next, or it might have been both. By Friday.
So, what they mean by what happened next, the British did a very atrocious thing. They started rounding up anyone they deemed as a military-aged man and began to shoot them. They didn't know who was friend or foe. And again, this goes in what I was talking about in the last video, this idea of total war. You don't know who's on your side. You don't know, look what the Sherwood Foresters did to an entire regiment. you don't know what's going on. So you can either act like everything's fine or you take them out. And this isn't me supporting that because, again, it was horrible. You would have 80-year-old men who were brought out and they were shot by British officers just because it was easier than having to worry about them shooting at them. It was horrendous. And you know what the thing was? You had these British soldiers, which I guarantee that's what he's about to talk about because the animation looks furious. These soldiers were done. They were freaking done. They were like, I am coming from dying in Europe to have it to come back to British soil to kill my countrymen. These guys are traitors and I'm going to kill them. I'm saying that's what they're saying, not me.
Friday, the bloodshed around the four courts still showed no sign of ending, and furious at the casualties sustained, British soldiers burst into a series of homes late Friday night. In an event that became known as the North King Street Massacre, they shot or bayoneted 15 unarmed men, none of whom were taking part in the rising. Such were the realities of rebellion. For the Nationalists, North King Street was just another example of British brutality, added to centuries of oppression and injustice. And to the British, North King Street was the inevitable result of the Nationalists intentionally blurring the lines between soldiers and civilians, thus bringing death and ruination down upon their own people. And as the uprising raged on, many Dubliners actually shared that.
And this works into both sides, but this will, in the long run, play more into the nationalist side of things. Because, you know what the thing is, at the end of the day, you know, I make a lot of pop culture references in this, but I think movies are the best way to show these things. There's two good movies that are about the Irish Civil War, for example, but with one of them being the discussion of the War of Independence too, and that movie's called The Wind That Shakes the Barley and The Banshees of Inisherin. Now, let me explain. Wind That Shakes the Barley starts post-1916, and what happens is the British pretty much just round up a bunch of kids playing, they're playing, oh my god, what the hell are they playing? It's an Irish, it's kind of like an Irish cross in a weird way. But they round them up and then they kill one of the people and attack the women. This is unfortunately was much more common than not. The British thought they were making a point. They thought they were telling them, you are below us, remain where you are. But all that did was bolster the nationalist ranks. Now, in 1916, not really, because what it was doing for a lot of people, at least in Dublin, it was making them side with the British because they're like, yeah, you're traitors. You're attacking us while we're in the middle of a war. Yeah, you're at the wrong. But as we go into the end of this video and in the last video probably mostly, we're going to see how this tactic is going to inevitably backfire on the British.
British view. They saw the rising as a betrayal of the homeland, especially since hundreds of thousands of Irishmen, including Irish nationalists, were giving their lives in the struggle overseas against Imperial Germany. But regardless, as the brutal fighting near the Four Courts dragged on, it quickly became clear that it would not be the bloodiest engagement that day. Northumberland Road, Dublin, Ireland, that same day. A column of British soldiers march along the street through a leafy, well-to-do part of Dublin. They are
So this is what we were talking about earlier. These are the Sherwood Foresters.
reinforcements heading into the city. Fresh troops, newly arrived from London, and most just out of basic training. One man, Adjutant Captain Frederick Christian Dietrichson, briefly falls out of ranks to greet a woman and two children. They are Dietrichson's wife, son, and daughter. The captain had sent for them from London, moving them to Ireland in hopes to avoid the threat of German Zeppelin bombings. He could have never imagined an even greater danger awaited them here. But for now, he's relieved to see that his family is safe, and they, for their part, will never see him again. Just a few minutes later, Dietrichson and 9 other soldiers die in a rebel ambush not far from Mount Street Bridge. Caught in the open, the inexperienced soldiers suffer terrible losses, and rather than retreat, they're ordered to press on. So they did, marching directly into a disaster. At Mount Street Bridge, spanning the Grand Canal, those British reinforcements struggled against a small detachment of dug-in rebels. Ill-equipped and inexperienced, they suffered 216 casualties, accounting.
That's insane. three to 10 guys took down 216 wounded or dead English soldiers. That's insane. Can you imagine? And this is like, it's, you think about this, and this is where you have Michael Collins. Like I said, he's in the GPO in a past video. He's in the GPO. He is Joseph Plunkett, one of the leaders, aide de camp. He's the one that's dealing with the communications between the different units that are coming in. He's seeing things like this, and he's like, this is our strength. He's like, we can't take them on in the field. They're too big. They're too powerful. This is the only way we are going to win, by force. It's astonishing.
For 2/3 of all of the British Army losses during the Rising. In addition, around 20 civilians were also killed or wounded while trying to help fallen British soldiers caught in the open. Elsewhere, at the Mendicity Institution Charity Building, 26 Irish volunteers made a stand against repeated British assaults. Enduring sniper fire and a hail of bullets from machine guns, the outpost continued to resist until they ran out of ammunition. And this was just one of many similar incidents across the city. For the Nationalists, fighting from the Northumberland Hotel to the South Dublin Union, all of whom had resolved to take up arms despite the odds, this rising was the ultimate moment of reckoning, the struggle they believed they had inherited from their forefathers. Further west, at the South Dublin Union, more brutal close combat played out. The fighting went from building to building and room to room as the British attempted to pry the
Yeah, this is an insane thing. These guys, like, this was like, when you think of urban fighting, like Stalingrad style, this is what these guys were doing. They were literally fighting room to room. British soldiers were shooting through walls just because they were afraid of what was waiting on the other side of the room. The Irish soldiers were horrified because, you know what the thing is? They have Mausers, they have ammo, they might be running low on ammo, but they have it. The British were fixing bayonets and they were hand-to-hand fighting. That's terrifying. This is something I think in modern warfare we forget. There is nothing more personal than bayonet fighting because you have to get close and you're looking at that person the whole time. Like shooting, sometimes you can make the rationale that, it is what it is. Like the bullet killed him, I didn't kill him. You're thrusting that bayonet into that person. So this is one of the craziest things is when they are clearing out these buildings, getting the volunteers out. They are doing brutal hand-to-hand fighting, and in some cases, they're coming in with Vickers machine guns and they're just shooting up the walls because in their mind it's easier just to kill everything in their way than to risk the hand-to-hand combat. And that's why so many civilians are killed, because at the end of the day, they're throwing grenades, they're shooting machine guns, they're firing artillery into these places, and they don't care who's in their way. And this kind of plays into this, there's a story about Richard Harris. That's Jared Harris. A lot of you probably know Jared Harris from Sherlock Holmes. He plays Moriarty. He's a great actor. He's in the Chernobyl series. He's in a lot of stuff. But his father was Richard Harris, who was a very famous actor as well. He was in Major Dundee. My generation probably knows him better from Harry Potter. He was the first Dumbledore. When he was actually filming Harry Potter in England, he was passing a shop, and in the shop it said no Irish apply. The Irish, there was a racism against the Irish with the English, so that's why when these units from England were coming in, they were being a lot more indiscriminate. They didn't care if you were a rebel. They didn't care if you were a civilian. They didn't care if you were a kid. You're in their sights, you're gone. And that's how this fighting was. And that's what makes it that much more terrifying.
rebels from their positions. Some of the structures in the complex were taken, but others remained in the hands of the volunteers. The rebels fought for every inch. And when one nationalist officer was severely wounded, he ordered his men to leave him behind, while he continued to fight on, alone, armed only with his pistol. Though frontal assaults were the order of the day in some parts of the city, in others, the nationalists were instead subjected to ranged bombardment. British artillery opened fire on Wednesday from Trinity College and Phibsborough, supported by a gunboat that had sailed up the River Liffey. The relentless shelling killed volunteers and civilians alike and kept most of the rebels pinned down. In a matter of days, the grand architecture of several Dublin neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble. Meanwhile, outside Dublin, counter orders had ensured that most of the Irish volunteers beyond the city stayed at home. Others mustered.
See, now this is the moment where we really realize how bad the people in Dublin situation was. In Dublin, they thought the orders went out. They thought the country was rising up. They thought the British UVF soldiers in the north were being overrun by volunteers. They thought Cork City was seized and saved. Cork, that's my home county. That's where my family's from. They're known as the rebel county. So they thought they were in control of Cork, the biggest county of Ireland. They thought in Mayo they were taking over the cities. They thought Galway had fallen. They thought they were in control of Kerry. None of this happened. They just thought it was happening because they knew the numbers they had. They were like, well, if they're sending all this here, that means they must not think the other areas are worth it, and they need this as a beachhead. That wasn't what it was. It was just this was the only place really rising up, and that's why Dublin suffered more.
But didn't engage in combat, and in Cork, Roman Catholic clergy successfully persuaded the volunteers to surrender their weapons to the British Army. Though elsewhere...
To add to that about the clergy, the Catholic Church has always played a very large part in Irish independence. This goes all the way back to Henry VIII and the Protestant Reformation. The Catholic Church has always had a very strong hand on Ireland. Very recently, there was an incident in Ireland. I'm not going to go into detail. It involved nuns and some situations with the church doing some inappropriate things that the church was actually forced to apologize for. But the thing was, during the War of Independence, and even honestly through the Troubles, the Catholic Church was funneling a lot of money into the Irish nationalists because, again, most of them were Catholics. Even Sinn Féin, which through time turned from an Irish... Because Sinn Féin will have a split in the party, and one part will become left, one part will become right. The part that became left stayed as Sinn Féin, and the part that became right became Fianna Fáil. And Fianna Fáil will become the dominant political party in Ireland for a long time, and Sinn Féin will fall from that because Sinn Féin will be more the left side of things that supported socialism and everything. But Sinn Féin is also where the Provisional IRA, that's the Troubles IRA, that's where they found a home. And that was mainly a Catholic Defense League, if you really think about it. So it's Catholicism was very important. So that's why when you had people like priests and cardinals and stuff saying, please stop, don't do this, you're killing each other. Even in Dublin, you had priests running into the GPO trying to convince Pearse and Connolly and Clark to surrender and end it. Even famously during the Troubles, Father Daly during Bloody Sunday, he was waving a white handkerchief to beg the paratroopers to stop firing on the crowds. So that's a very big part of the Irish culture, is this faith in Catholicism and this trust in the church.
Where a few chose to ignore their directives and fight anyway. The largest entanglement outside Dublin occurred to the north of the city, where an Irish volunteer battalion convinced a string of Royal Irish Constabulary stations to surrender. The last one did so only after a 5-hour-long firefight that left 8 policemen and 5 volunteers dead. Despite this, there was still next to no support for the uprising from the general Irish populace, so the success or failure of the rising would ultimately hinge on the events playing out in Dublin. Sackville Street, April 29th, 1916. The General Post Office is in flames, its ruins blazing, as a pale of black smoke joins the dozens of smudges already blotting the Dublin skyline. However, the structure is mercifully abandoned. The nationalist leadership who fought from it have evacuated at the last minute, tunneling through walls to escape the all-consuming.
So I think he's probably going to mention where they went. They went to the place called Moore Street. I actually participated in a group that we were trying to save Moore Street because a development company came into Dublin and they actually wanted to total it and rebuild the area. But we were fighting to have it kept because it did hold such a significance, because that's where the new leadership headquarters was set after the fall of the post office.
Fire. They set up a new command post in nearby Moore Street. Every one of them, from the newest volunteer right up the chain of command to Pierce himself, is exhausted. Some are wounded, some dying. James Connolly has taken a bullet to the leg. Food.
So Conley actually, it's actually really sad what happened to him. He was the way the actually, do I still have that? I might have that map still. Yeah. So give me 1 second. Where is that map? Why will my map not come up? Oh, that's weird. There we go. Yeah, so Conley, he actually gets wounded in the leg in a very terrible way, actually. Give me 1 second to show y'all how what caused it, so to speak. I have a problem that I'm able to look this up so easily. So what pretty much happened is, here's the Grand Post Office. Well, General Post Office. It had different names. The British had already occupied these buildings. There's actually a hotel right here. They had already occupied all these buildings. Oh, and here's the Jim Larkin statue. I mentioned that, I think, last video. But so you had this courtyard back here, because this is where the mail trucks would come in. And they barricaded it up, but they had set up a machine gun, and they were firing down on the position. And here's Moore Street. This is where they evacuated to. But they were firing on the position intensely. So Conley, because his men were afraid, he actually voluntarily led them to rebuild the barricade, and in the process he got shot in the leg. And what happened was, obviously, he was not getting the best medical treatment inside the field hospital, because it's a field hospital in a building that's falling apart. And what ends up happening is his leg actually becomes gangrenous. And it's very bad, and he was suffering quite a bit at the end. We'll get into that, though, when we get to the end.
Food, water, ammunition, and medical supplies. All of it is almost gone. The volunteers called, but Ireland has not answered. They have no more left to give. Pierce knows that the cost to the city has already been appalling, and fighting to the death will only lead to more civilian casualties. So reluctantly, he orders his men to lay down their arms and sends a message to the British asking for terms. The Easter Rising is over. Pierce, Connolly, and the other leaders of the uprising in Dublin are taken into captivity. It takes a few days for the surrender orders to reach the various pockets of rebel resistance, and after the high emotion and intense combat, many are reluctant to give up their weapons. This had been their chance, their moment to change the history of their country and avenge centuries of oppression.
And to add to that, the Irish national anthem is Arab na Fein. It's called the Soldier Song. And when they finally agreed to surrender, the volunteers all started singing it in Irish, because that was something that the English really tried to take away from the Irish. They tried to take their language away. Irish is obviously a Celtic-based language, but the English tried to get rid of their language, and even to this day, very few Irish speak fluent Irish. There is a movement to bring it back, but very few Irish still speak Irish.
And yet, they'd failed. When the last of them finally submitted, the cost of the uprising became clear. At the final count, 126 British soldiers, including 35 from Irish regiments, had been killed along with 17 policemen, and among the nationalists, 66 had died. But the greatest number of dead were the civilians, 260 in all, with thousands more wounded. Parts of Dublin were in ruins from shelling, and smoke continued to cloud the sky for days. But while the fighting may have been over,
so that's pretty much what happened. You see those numbers, you're like, oh well, that's not bad. They're like, I know you're sitting there like, Tim, you've been doing series on the Civil War. Gettysburg, there's over 50,000 casualties. Yeah, but also, again, you have armies of almost 90,000 men fighting each other. You have this small little division fighting against massive units that are being brought in. You have the city being bombarded. You have all these terrible things happening to these people. And, you know, like I said, in the next one, we're probably going to see how this is all going to backfire in the English. But I don't want to go into that yet. We're going to go into that tomorrow in that episode. But with that said, thank you all for joining me. Please check out the Patreon. You know, Extra Histories friends love his Patreon. Just saying. But thank you so much for joining me. Please donate to the National Park Preservation Fund. Help our parks during these tough times. And if you enjoy the content, please like, share, and comment. And please hit that little red button. Hit the bell and subscribe to the channel. I know y'all keep coming back. I thank you so much for everything. And we will see you in the next one.